He doesn't announce his exit.
He doesn't warn anyone.
One day, he simply stops showing up in places that no longer nourish his mind, his purpose, or his evolution.
To outsiders, it looks abrupt.
To him, it's a calculated strategy, the final step after observing, evaluating, and realizing the environment has nothing left to offer.
Sigmas don't burn bridges.
They delete themselves from the landscape quietly, surgically, without leaving a trace of emotional residue. And when they leave, the entire dynamic shifts, because their absence exposes truths no one wanted to see while they were present.
This is the Sigma male strategy people misunderstand the most. Disappearing not out of weakness, but out of precision. When a space can no longer match his growth, he withdraws to protect his momentum. And the silence he leaves behind reveals everything. Before we go deeper, answer this in the comments. Have you ever outgrown an environment before the people in it realized you were evolving? Comment outgrown if this resonates. And make sure you're subscribed to Silent Wise, where we decode the psychology behind every step the Sigma takes.
He leaves when the environment no longer challenges his growth. The moment he feels the terrain beneath him becoming predictable, something inside him shuts down.
Not out of frustration, but out of instinct. The same instinct that tells a tree its roots can no longer stretch, or a wolf that the forest it knows too well has nothing left to teach.
His withdrawal doesn't begin with anger or disappointment. It begins with a quiet realization that he has already extracted every lesson the environment had to offer. What once felt stimulating becomes static. What once sharpened him now dulls him. And when a Sigma reaches that threshold, his presence starts dissolving like a shadow at sunset. Gradual, silent, intentional.
He doesn't announce his departure, because growth doesn't negotiate with stagnation.
Instead, he studies the environment one last time, observing how every repetition feels like a loop designed to keep him small. The same conversations, the same conflicts, the same people cycling through the same excuses. Nothing evolves.
Nothing expands.
Nothing challenges the edges of who he is becoming.
And while others cling to comfort, he feels it choking his momentum.
His detachment builds quietly, not as rejection, but as an internal migration toward a life that demands more of him.
He begins investing energy elsewhere, in new skills, new horizons, new versions of himself that this environment can't contain.
By the time people notice his absence, his mind is already miles ahead.
Leaving becomes the only logical path, not an emotional reaction. He walks away because staying would mean betraying his own evolution.
Growth requires friction, pressure, uncertainty, things stagnant environments can't offer. So he steps out without bitterness, without apology, without looking back.
He understands that every chapter has an expiration point, and when his spirit stops expanding, the story must end.
His exit is not escape, but elevation.
He doesn't abandon environments, he outgrows them.
And in that quiet departure, he chooses the only direction that has ever mattered to him, forward. He withdraws the moment he senses the energy has shifted against his values.
A Sigma doesn't need conflict, drama, or direct confrontation to know something is off. He feels it before anyone speaks it.
The air gets heavier. Conversations become slightly misaligned, and the intentions in the room no longer match the tone. His intuition is sharp enough to detect even the smallest fracture between what people say and what they truly mean. And once he senses that the energy around him has drifted from honesty, loyalty, or respect, something inside him disconnects instantly. Not gradually, instantly. His presence begins to dim, his responses shorten, and his emotional investment falls to zero. It's not anger, It's alignment. When the vibe breaks from his values, he quietly steps back into himself. He doesn't confront the shift because he doesn't need to. Values are not up for negotiation, and he refuses to waste breath explaining principles to people who stopped honoring them. Instead, he watches. He observes how people begin revealing who they really are when they believe he isn't fully aware. He notes the subtle disrespect, the small betrayals, the change in tone, the unspoken tension. All of it is data. All of it confirms his intuition. And with each confirmation, he withdraws further, emotionally first, then physically. His silence becomes his shield. His distance becomes his clarity. He understands that when an environment no longer reflects his principles, staying becomes self-betrayal. So he chooses the version of himself that refuses to shrink. By the time anyone realizes he's gone, he already left long ago, mentally, spiritually, morally. He doesn't fight for spaces that dishonor his core. He doesn't force himself to adapt to energy that contradicts his truth. Instead, he disappears with the dignity of someone who knows his values are his compass, and he refuses to let them be bent by shifting tides. His withdrawal isn't weakness, it's precision. When the energy turns, he doesn't argue, he exits. And in that exit, he protects the integrity that makes him who he is. He deletes himself quietly to avoid unnecessary conflict or emotion. When a Sigma male decides it's time to leave an environment, he doesn't slam doors, demand explanations, or ignite drama. He simply begins to turn invisible. Not in a literal sense, but in the way his presence fades from the emotional landscape of the place. He knows conflict wastes energy, and emotional confrontations pull people into cycles he has no interest in repeating. So he chooses a different weapon: silence. His withdrawal is subtle, almost surgical, a clean cut that leaves no room for misunderstanding. He stops offering pieces of himself, stops anchoring conversations, stops carrying emotional weight that isn't his. By the time others notice the distance, the emotional cord has already been severed. He engineers a quiet exit because peace, not victory, is what he values. He deletes himself gently, like closing a tab you no longer need. No announcement, no farewell tour, just a calm, deliberate, disappearing act. He does it this way because he understands human emotions, how confrontations trigger defense mechanisms, how explanations lead to excuses, how goodbyes reopen wounds he's already healed. He knows many people don't want truth. They want control or justification. And offering either traps him in emotional negotiations he refuses to participate in. So he steps out without ceremony. He leaves the emotional furniture exactly where it stood, causing no disturbance. His absence speaks far more clearly than his words ever could, and he lets that silence do the work. In the aftermath of his exit, people replay interactions, searching for clues they missed. They wonder when he began detaching, when the light in his presence dimmed, when the invisible barrier formed. But a Sigma's quiet departure isn't a riddle. It's a reflection of his values. He removes himself to protect his peace, not to punish anyone. He leaves because conflict distorts truth and emotions cloud judgment. By disappearing without noise, he preserves his integrity and ensures no one drags him into chaos he never chose. That is his power, the ability to walk away without leaving ashes behind. He observes patterns long enough to confirm the place is no longer aligned with his future. Before a Sigma male removes himself from an environment, he studies it with almost scientific precision. He watches how people behave when they think he isn't paying attention, how conversations repeat without evolution, how the energy of the room slowly shifts from possibility to stagnation. He pays attention to cycles, the promises that never become actions, the dynamics that drain more than they give, the subtle changes in tone that reveal fading respect or shifting priorities. He isn't impulsive. He waits, analyzes, and maps the truth beneath the surface. And once the patterns are clear, the conclusion becomes undeniable. This place can no longer carry him into the life he's building. What once felt aligned now feels too small, too predictable, too disconnected from the path unfolding in his mind. That realization becomes the quiet turning point. He doesn't confront the environment or demand it become something it can't be. Instead, he shifts inward and becomes noticeably more silent, more observant, more detached. His presence changes because his vision changes. He no longer asks, "How can I fit here?" but, "Does this version of me belong here anymore?" Every repeated pattern confirms the answer. He notices the conversations that circle back to the same complaints, the relationships that require effort without return, the routines that once fueled him but now exhaust him. These patterns aren't just data, they become evidence, a map pointing him toward the exit. The Sigma sees what others ignore, that staying in a place out of habit is a form of self-betrayal, and he refuses to sacrifice his evolution for comfort or familiarity. By the time he decides to leave, the emotional separation has already taken place. He has analyzed the pattern, understood its trajectory, and accepted that staying would mean slowing his own. His exit is not dramatic, it's precise. He walks away the moment the pattern becomes undeniable, not out of frustration, but out of alignment. He honors the truth he has observed. When an environment stops reflecting his future, it's time to choose a new one. And in that choice, he reclaims his momentum, his clarity, and the promise of who he is becoming. He detaches from people who keep him operating below his potential. A Sigma male can sense with almost surgical precision when someone in his life is keeping him anchored to a version of himself he has already outgrown. It isn't always intentional. Sometimes it's the subtle discouragement masked as concern, the predictable conversations that never evolve, or the quiet expectation that he stays who he used to be. He recognizes when he's shrinking to maintain harmony, when he's dimming his ambition so others feel comfortable, when he's holding back ideas because the room cannot hold them. This realization hits him not as anger, but as a moment of deep internal clarity. These people benefit from his stagnation. And once he sees that truth, detachment becomes inevitable. He pulls back quietly, not to punish, but to breathe again, to reclaim the mental space he needs to rise. His withdrawal is gradual and precise. He stops sharing his dreams with those who mock or minimize them. He no longer accepts invitations that drain his focus. He becomes more selective with his time, more protective of his energy, more deliberate with his silence. As he steps back, the contrast becomes undeniable. He feels lighter, sharper, more aligned with who he is becoming. He notices how quickly his mind expands once he is no longer surrounded by people who prefer him small. In the quiet distance he creates, he starts building again. New habits, new goals, new internal standards. He's not escaping people, he's escaping the mental ceiling they unknowingly impose. And with every step away, he rises closer to the version of himself he knows he's capable of becoming. By the time others realize he has drifted, he has already crossed the internal threshold. He does not explain his departure because the reasons were visible in their behaviors long before he walked away. Detachment isn't an act of cruelty, it's an act of survival, a refusal to sacrifice his potential for relationships that cannot grow with him. He chooses environments that challenge him, people who elevate him, and paths that demand evolution. And in that quiet departure, he proves something profound. The fastest way to reach your higher self is to stop surrounding yourself with those who are invested in your lower one. He disappears strategically reclaiming clarity and direction. A Sigma male never vanishes out of impulse. His disappearance is a calculated reset, a deliberate withdrawal designed to reclaim the clarity that noise and friction slowly blur. He senses when his mind is becoming cluttered, when the world's expectations begin tugging at his focus, when the subtle chaos of other people's needs begins drowning out his inner compass. Instead of pushing through the fog, he steps out of sight. His absence becomes a tool. Distance sharpens perspective. Silence resets emotional equilibrium, and solitude becomes the environment where his true direction resurfaces. In that strategic retreat, he strips away the mental static that kept him misaligned, letting only truth remain. The truth of who he is, what he wants, and where he must go next. As he pulls away, the world interprets his silence as avoidance, coldness, or indifference, but he knows it's something entirely different. It's recalibration. It's rebuilding the internal architecture that life's noise tries to damage. In his quiet disappearance, he studies what drained him, what distracted him, and what derailed him from his purpose. He reorders priorities, cuts emotional ties that no longer support his evolution, and restores boundaries that had softened over time. Without the influence of external opinions, he begins to think with precision again, unclouded by drama, expectation, or obligation. His thoughts stretch farther. His intuition sharpens. His purpose begins to glow again under the weightless stillness he intentionally creates. By the time he returns, if he chooses to return at all, he is no longer the version of himself that left. He emerges aligned, intentional, stripped of illusions and emotional clutter. His disappearance wasn't an escape. It was a strategy to regain the power he refuses to waste on chaos. And though people may never understand the timing or the silence, the transformation is unmistakable. His eyes carry direction again. His presence carries intention, and his path becomes unmistakably his. In disappearing, he didn't run away. He reclaimed the clarity and momentum that make him unstoppable. He never returns to environments he has outgrown. Closure is internal, not external. A Sigma male does not seek apologies, explanations, or validation to finalize an ending. The moment he recognizes that an environment no longer aligns with his evolution, the door closes within him, quietly, firmly, and permanently. His closure happens in the mind long before his absence is noticed. He does not revisit places where he shrank himself, where his value went unseen, or where his growth was stalled. For him, returning would mean stepping backward into a version of himself he worked hard to shed. He knows that environments shape identity, and once he transcends a space, it becomes too small to contain who he's becoming. His exit is not dramatic, it is definitive. When he leaves, he carries the lesson, not the attachment. In the silence that follows his departure, something powerful happens. He reclaims all the energy he once poured into people, routines, and dynamics that could no longer meet him at the level of his growth. Without the emotional weight of old expectations, his mind becomes sharper and his direction becomes unmistakably clear. He stops needing closure from others because he realizes that seeking explanations only binds him to the past. Instead, he builds closure through understanding what drained him, what limited him, and what no longer matched his frequency. That inner clarity becomes the final chapter, and nothing external can rewrite it. His past environments may wonder why he never returns, but the truth is simple. He outgrew the role he played there, and he refuses to reprise it. By moving forward without looking back, he protects the identity he fought to rebuild. His path bends toward new environments, new levels of purpose, and new versions of himself that old spaces could never support. To him, growth is irreversible. Once he expands, He cannot shrink again just to fit someone else's comfort. So he walks into the future with quiet certainty, leaving behind not bitterness, but completion. His absence becomes the message. His evolution becomes the closure. And the world he left behind eventually realizes what he already knew. Some doors stay closed not out of anger, but because the man who walked through them has become someone they can no longer contain. When a Sigma male walks away from a space he's outgrown, he doesn't leave chaos behind. He leaves a lesson, a silence, and a version of himself that will never return. Growth becomes his direction, clarity becomes his compass, and the future becomes the only place he invests his energy. If this perspective hits somewhere you didn't expect, tell me in the comments with one word: evolved. And if you want more deep psychology on Sigma mindsets and silent transformation, make sure to subscribe to Silent Wise. Your support helps this channel grow in the shadows, exactly where true wisdom is built.